Nuclear weapons possession has been a relevant issue in international diplomacy ever since the first detonation of the atomic bomb in 1945. For this reason, our group has posed the question, how can nuclear possession be secured to restore and maintain global diplomacy? After examining the nuances of this issue, we determined that the most high-impact solution would be a non-nuclear reward system in which nuclear superpowers would transfer conventional arms to non-nuclear states to increase membership on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, our path to the solution was by no means linear. We considered the political, historical, economic, and environmental effects of nuclear weapons possession all throughout our research process. And at the very forefront of our research, we made sure to consider the modern-day effects nuclear weapons possession has. So I will now turn this over to my peer Scarlett as she delves into the urgency of this issue.
As my peer emphasized, issues in international diplomacy extend into current-day conflicts. In the Russian and Ukraine war, Russia has used nuclear threats to keep Western intervention at bay. At the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Williams et al. Define Russia's threats as signaling or relying on nuclear threats to offset their losses in the war. They have also studied how Russia has consistently violated international nuclear policies. This presents a threat to global nuclear order. Since the start of the war, Russia has refused to comply with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, suspended the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and withdrawn from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, allowing them to resume nuclear testing. Another issue we've identified is how poor diplomacy often leads to international pressure. US and NATO's interactions with Russia have resulted in different decisions regarding nuclear weapons use. Senior researcher at Harvard Kennedy School, Mariana Bujarin, accounts a statement from US President Joe Biden who said that there would be severe consequences for Russia if they engaged in nuclear weapons use. This statement from Putin emphasizes the fragile state between Russia and Ukraine. Quote, "Whoever tries to impede us, let alone create threats for our country and its people, must know that the Russian response will be immediate and lead to the consequences you have never seen in history."
Conclusive parallels can be drawn between Russia's behaviors during the Cold War era and during the 21st century. During the Cold War era, as asserted by emeritus professors McWilliams and Piotrowski, it was really the, quote, specter of an inevitably expansionist Soviet state that incentivized the United States' promotion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Ultimately, our point here is that it wasn't just nuclear weapons at the root of all this political activity, but it was also the threat of an expanding communist regime under the Soviet rule that sparked such contentions. And in the modern day, these threats have been translated into words. As previously suggested by my peer Scarlett, the recent rhetoric used by Russian President Vladimir Putin has sparked concern for the use of nuclear weapons in combat. And according to the Federation of American Scientists, Russia remains a top occupant of nuclear weapons, as can be seen in this chart. Thus, Russian President Vladimir Putin has created a global political climate that holds nuclear World War III as an imminent possibility.
Another lens we viewed this issue from was the economic lens, where we analyzed the economic imbalance between nuclear and non-nuclear nations. To help introduce this lens, we found a quote from research professor Bharat Karnad's 2014 article, "Ban the Bomb and Indian Response." This quote reads, "All 6 of the leading nuclear-armed states, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, and India rank among the world's top 10 in gross domestic product." By analyzing Karnad's research, it is shown that more often than not, nuclear nations have a stronger economy while non-nuclear nations have a weaker economy. Although these statistics do not provide enough evidence for a direct correlation, the information is still relevant to understanding the diplomatic relationships between nuclear and non-nuclear nations. For example, this information can impact decision-making for both nuclear and non-nuclear nations. If a non-nuclear nation with an unstable economy realizes this information, they might consider going nuclear. On the flip side, nuclear nations with a strong economy might realize this and think that if they were to give up their arms, they would be seen as vulnerable and could lose their power. These events are not ideal because they directly contradict the problem that we proposed in the beginning of this presentation. However, it is not just the nation's economy being impacted by nuclear weaponry, it's also humans and the environment.
Nuclear weapons can cause a large amount of damage to the environment. One of these effects, according to researchers Murtaza et al., is atmospheric smoke layers. These smoke layers can block out sunlight and cause climate change, which poses a danger to the human race. Nuclear weapons can also negatively affect humanity. Nuclear weapons effects can spread throughout entire communities, causing people to experience a condition known as psychological fallout, which is characterized by trauma or anxiety symptoms in those who believe they have been exposed. In addition, nuclear weapons can also cause health consequences such as leukemia. According to researcher Boubel, about 10% of the 11,000 cancer deaths resulting from radiation exposure between 1951 and 2000 were likely a result of leukemia. There are other cancers that can result from radiation exposure, but leukemia is by far the most common.
Among the solutions we've found in our research, we've identified total international compliance as a poor solution. Dr. Saeed Bagheri, a fellow in international law at European University Institute, claims that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has failed. In replacement, he suggests an international legal regime that would require cooperation from every country and alter current treaties to practice equal sharing and obligations. The objective of this treaty would be to create a nuclear-free world. However, we believe this is unlikely. Some limitations we've identified are how non-nuclear states are reliant on the security assurances that nuclear states provide for them. By dismantling current obligations, it would change the framework of nuclear politics as we know it. For this reason, we believe that this solution would be impossible to implement without opposition.
A solution proposed by researchers Duzer and Sandersacker is the construction of underground facilities for storing radioactive waste. Radioactive elements have extremely long half-lives, which means it takes a long time for half of any given sample of radioactive element to decay. This means that any radioactive material that's left exposed would take an extremely long time to decay, and it would continue to pose a threat to the environment and to the human race. These underground facilities would limit the threat that the radioactive material would cause to the environment and diminish the threat of being exposed to radiation. Although this is a reasonable solution, it has not been applied in most places, as only Finland has begun working on such a facility.
Finally, a non-nuclear reward system, which is what we believe to be the most effective solution at combating nuclear proliferation, relies heavily on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. According to the UN's Office for Disarmament Affairs, the NPT states that nuclear nations must not enable or encourage the occupation of nuclear weapons in non-nuclear states, while non-nuclear signatories must abstain totally from the occupation or manufacturing of nuclear weapons. So, we believe that we can implement a non-nuclear reward system in which nuclear superpowers transfer conventional arms to non-nuclear states. The transfer of conventional arms would influence non-nuclear states to ratify the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by acting as, quote, signing bonuses, as postdoctoral research fellow Erickson et al. Puts it. And we know this is possible because it has been done before. According to Erickson et al., during the Cold War era, the United States and the Soviet Union dominated the field of conventional arms transfers. Considering this timing, it can be logically concluded that conventional arms transfers were used to increase NPT membership and thus restore peace during a period of distortion.
In their findings, Erickson et al. Confirms a positive correlation between conventional arms transfer and NPT membership. However, this correlation is not direct. Also, An increase in conventional weaponry transfer may result in counterproductive acts of conventional proliferation. At the end of the day, proliferation is proliferation, no matter the circumstances. Unfortunately, proliferation may always harm world relations, which is why it has to be acknowledged, understood, and carefully tackled.
And finally, here are all of our sources and a second slide of our sources.
Thank you. Scarlett, I would like you to describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
An argument from one of my peers that made me think differently was Gabby's argument about implementing the solution of a solution of increasing NPT membership. My sources concluded that the NPT was invalid or failed in its objective. However, Gabby's solution suggested that all we have to do to implement an effective solution is to increase NPT membership. So it has made me think differently about my argument by recounting the possibility of just changing NPT, altering the NPT to make it a more effective treaty.
Thank you. Christina, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one of them had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem that your group identified?
I felt that Scarlett's work had the greatest impact on my overall understanding because her work focused on modern day conflicts for nuclear nations, and it allowed me to look at other research for how nuclear weapons affect the world today, besides my own.
Thank you. Bella, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or other limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
I feel like a futuristic lens would help broaden the scope of our research and put into perspective the possibility of a nuclear World War III.
Thank you. Gabby, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team's presentation, and why?
So Scarlett had a compelling argument really talking about a treaty that was used between North Korea and South Korea at the end of the Korean War, and she posed it as a sort of solution that could answer our possible research question. However, we saw that this renewal of a treaty would be too specific and too regional to answer our broader question, which regards global diplomacy as opposed to regional diplomacy.